Dabney Evans, would you please join me?
Thank you, Obse, and welcome everyone. Please join me in a round of applause for Obse, who has done a fantastic job bringing us all together. We would not be here, and this entire event would not be possible without a lot of hard work on her part, as well as those of our partners. So I'm really, really grateful to her, and also grateful to all of you for being here today. I want to officially welcome you to the 4th annual Emory 21 Days for Peace keynote event, which is focused on global leadership and social inclusion. Emory 21 Days for Peace is a collaboration between the Institute for Developing Nations, Emory Campus Life, the Carter Center's Human Rights Program, and the United States Institute of Peace, highlighting the UN International Day of Peace, celebrated September 21st, tomorrow, around the world. The goal of Emory 21 Days of Peace is to inspire, empower, and educate students to build peace in their local and global communities. To do so, we work across all schools, disciplines, and units at Emory. It's a lot like the real world. You have to talk to people that work in different areas than you do. We want to inspire conversation and dialogue about peace, which is why we've set up the tables as they are today. This entire event is meant to be a conversation. And we have some leaders at each table, so I'd like to ask each table leader to please raise their hands. Thank you. Let's give them a round of applause, too. Something tells me this group is going to be a talkative group, but just in case you're not, you have folks at each table who can prompt you and probe you and get you thinking about issues related to peace. So I want to thank them, and I want to thank you for beginning this conversation today and thinking about how we can expand these conversations more broadly at your dinner table tonight with your family and friends, later on in the year when you have Thanksgiving celebrations or celebrations over the holidays. Keep these conversations going. We also want to remind everyone that this event is being live streamed by the Carter Center Human Rights Program Forum on Women. And before I leave you to your meal and conversation, I would like to invite Suzanne Honorado, the Assistant Vice President of Campus Life and our partner in 21 Days of Peace, to make some brief remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Dabney, and thank you everyone for being here today. What an exciting event this is. On behalf of Emory Campus Life, I want to extend my heartfelt appreciation for your presence here today. Partnering with IDN on Emory 21 Days of Peace has not only broadened our scope of student engagement to the global level by collaborating with institutions such as the Carter Center and the United States Institute of Peace, it has also given us the opportunity to work across academic and campus life units here at Emory. I've been inspired by the past speakers and the wealth of courage, knowledge, and wisdom they have shared with our community. I am also honored to introduce to you all our new Vice President and Dean of Campus Life, Enku Galai. Enku, would you mind waving? This is her first opportunity to participate in the 21 Days of Peace, and she's really excited to be here with us today. She's joined Emory this fall and has really hit the ground running with a lot of different projects. So please help welcome her into the community. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank the co-sponsors for today's event, and they are many. The African Student Association, do we have anyone from that group here today? As I'm calling your organization, if you're here, please raise your hand and wave to us. The Center for Ethics, the Center for Contemplative Science and Compassion-Based Ethics, thank you. The Center for Humanitarian Emergencies, Rollins School of Public Health, the Department of French and Italian, the Department of Political Science, Emory International Relations Association, Emory Global Health Institute, Emory Global Strategies and Initiatives, thank you, Philip. Emory Government and Community Affairs, thank you all. The Goizueta Global Strategies and Initiatives, wonderful. The Institute of African Studies, Masters in Development Practice, the Lillian Carter Center for Global Health and Social Responsibility, and the Nell Hodgson Woodruff School of Nursing, the Office of Spiritual and Religious Life, and Oxford College at Emory. Thank you all so much. Enjoy your meal and the conversation, and we will be back shortly.
Hi. I hate to break up these conversations, but I know this is an important part of the event. And I also know that there's the next part, which we've all been waiting for. Before I talk about the next part, I want to encourage you to tweet using hashtag Peace Day Challenge and hashtag 21 Days of Peace about the event that we're doing right now. Either you can do so right now or after the event, just as long as you tweet. I would now like to invite Carla Roncalli, Associate Director of Masters in Development Practice, and one of IDN's Thought Leader Fellow, to introduce our student peace builders, and then Salman Jamadi, Professor of Political Science, who teaches African politics at Oxford College of Emory, and who is also one of IDN's Thought Leader Fellows, who will join us to introduce our featured guest speaker. Once all three of the student peace builders have been introduced, they will come and take their seats at the stage. Please hold your applause until all three have been introduced. And then afterwards, we'll introduce our guest speaker. I just want to give you all a round of applause for the conversation, and thank you for the table leaders, and thank you for accepting the request to be table leaders. Carla? Oh. Somebody has lost their phone. If this is your phone, okay, all right, great.
Thank you, Obse and Dabney, for this invitation. I'm really delighted to be here. This is an amazing event. And of course, thank you, Ambassador, for accepting our invitation. I'm Carla Roncoli, the Associate Director of the Master in Development Practice. For those hopefully few in the room that don't know what the MDP is, it's a 2-year interdisciplinary degree that prepares students for careers in international development and humanitarian organizations, such as CARE, Habitat for Humanity, the Save the Children, Carter Center. And we are very, very fortunate to have partners such as IDN and the Carter Center, AGHI, and many of the other co-sponsors of this program. Some of our students are here. Maybe they can just identify themselves. If you are interested in knowing more about the program, they can let you know. I'm really thrilled to be introducing these three leaders and innovators who are really doing very interesting things and putting peace at the intersection of really different kinds of sectors and areas, such as technology and business, health and food security, sociology and international law. They really do amazing work, and I think we'll see them do even more impactful work in the future. The first one is Sarah Kassabian. She is a senior from Oklahoma City, studying sociology and political science. She is the co-president of the Emory International Relations Association, which hosts Emory top-ranked Model UN team, as well as other programmatic events pertaining to international relations. Last year, Sarah was the Secretary General for Emory's 7th annual Model UN conference, which hosted a variety of committees on topics ranging from Israeli-Palestinian Committee to UN peacekeeping and so forth. Her main focus of study is international law and sociology of law. The other student is Pedro Garcia from Bogota, Colombia. He's educated in the United States, and he is an MBA student in the one-year program at Goizueta Business School, and the president of his class. Since graduating as an industrial engineer from Georgia Tech in 2011, he has held various really interesting positions, such as analyst with Porsche Cars, North America. So those of you interested in buying cars, maybe you can talk to him later. I think it's a little bit outside of my budget range. He's also managed multiple startups that deal with medical devices, and most importantly, he's very involved in a number of initiatives supporting Venezuelan immigrants that saw safety in Colombia. The third student is one of our own Master in Development Practice students. Garang Piol has an undergraduate degree from the Catholic University of Eastern Africa in Nairobi, and he is from South Sudan. Prior to attaining his degree, he worked with the Carter Center Guinea worm eradication program in South Sudan for 6 years, as well as other organizations such as, I think, Catholic Relief Services, and as well as national and local NGOs that deal with food security and peace building. His experience as a victim of armed conflict in South Sudan, he's defying the odds to become an agent of change for development in his country. He's passionate about community development and capacity building as a way of building resources and knowledge in his communities. And he's currently here at Emory in the hope of acquiring skills and knowledge and experience in methodologies and approaches that promote health and development in complex situations as South Sudan. And spoiler alert, there is a feature story in the upcoming magazine, Emory magazine, about his experience, which is really amazing, and there is no way I can do justice to it here. Finally, I have the privilege of introducing Professor Salmon Shomade, who will introduce the guest of honor. Thank you.
Good afternoon and greetings. It is a pleasure to be part of this much needed program. I am truly honored to introduce our Emory 21 Days of Peace featured speaker. Former Ambassador Bisa Williams is the Carter Center's Special Advisor for Mali and team leader of the Carter Center's mission as independent observer of the implementation of the Agreement for Peace and Reconciliation in Mali, which emanates from the Algiers process. Along with 4 other international staff and 2 Carter Center-based employees, the mission has worked in Mali since January 2017. And it's a first of its kind when you think about missions the kind of model it is. The model is for post-conflict accountability in Africa. In 2016, Ambassador Williams co-founded Williams Strategy Advisors LLC, which is a problem-solving consulting firm specializing in accelerating the realization of major infrastructure projects through a range of services, from strategic support to mobilization of resources. Before forming Williams Strategy Advisors, Ambassador Williams was a career member of the Foreign Service of the U.S. Department of State, and she held a number of senior positions, including Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for African Affairs, the U.S. Ambassador to the Republic of Niger, Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary for Western Hemisphere Affairs, and the Coordinator for Cuban Affairs, where in that position, she led the first official U.S. delegation to Cuba for direct talks after a hiatus of 7 years. Ambassador Williams also served at the White House as the National Security Council Director for International Organizations. Throughout her foreign service career, the ambassador distinguished herself as a leader, committed to problem solving, forging strong relationships with international partners, and to mentoring new officers. She has traveled throughout Africa, Europe, Central Asia, Brazil, and Central America, building and strengthening relationships with governments, civil society, entrepreneurs, and international organizations. Other foreign postings include the U.S. embassies in Mauritius, France, Panama, and in Guinea. In recognition of our contribution to U.S. national security and countering terrorism, in 2016, Ambassador Williams was awarded the Director's Medal of Service from the Director of the Central Intelligence Agency, I'm sure you've heard of that, CIA, which is itself an unprecedented recognition of a State Department official by the CIA. This high tribute was a fitting culmination to a diplomatic career in which Ambassador Williams received numerous superior honor and meritorious honor awards, as well as recognition from the Justice Department Federal Bureau of Investigation, also known as FBI. As far as our academic pedigree, Ambassador Williams received a Bachelor's of Arts degree cum laude from Yale University, and then she followed up with 2 master's degrees, one from the University of California, Los Angeles, and the other master's degree from the National War College of the National Defense University in Washington, D.C. She speaks several languages. As a person that also speaks several languages, I'm jealous because she speaks more languages than I do. Of course, she speaks English because she's going to be speaking to us in English, but she can also speak to us in French, Spanish, and in Portuguese, maybe among others. I'm sure she speaks some African languages. They were just not listed. It is indeed my pleasure, and please join me in welcoming Ambassador Bisa Williams and our Emory student, Peace Builders.
I'm going to go right to the podium. Oops, okay. Obse, we're trying to follow the format. Thank you very much, Dr. Shimade, and thank you, Madam Roncalli, and also Dean Evans. Thank you to Emory University for the privilege and the honor of inviting me to participate in your 21 Days of Freedom, 21 Days of Peace program. This is really quite a privilege for me. And thank you, all of you, for coming. I must say that I realized through the discussion we had at our table that Emory University, in its various faculties, has stimulated a lot of discussion about what it means to form peace and how do we contribute to it. I thought I would use this portion of the program, though, to really talk about a jewel, another of your jewels here at Emory, which is really the Carter Center, and it's specifically the Carter Center's work as the independent observer of the implementation of the peace treaty, of the peace agreement in Mali. I want to talk about that because it is offering what I consider to be a unique model. It is doing groundbreaking work, and it is an example of what in this century, as opposed to the century in which I started my foreign affairs career, 1984, that other century, what in this century are the possibilities for engagement and peace promotion and peace building and rooting, really, for non-traditional actors, such as NGOs. The independent observer for the implementation, independent observer of implementation of the peace agreement in Mali was a provision that was written in, was an entity that was written in to the actual peace agreement as the parties were negotiating it. And if I can just step back for a couple of minutes, I meant to put my timer on, so somebody please keep me on time. The rebellion in Mali was not the first one. It was about the fourth or the fifth rebellion that had occurred in Mali. And all the other rebellions obviously had failed, which is why the grievances continued, and one of the reasons why things began to really explode in 2011. This time, however, in the effort for the northern groups that felt that that had what they considered to be legitimate grievances with the government, the northern groups were divided among themselves. Some wanted succession, some wanted autonomy, but others wanted to manifest their grievances with the government, but not necessarily secede from the nation. So there were two warring rebel factions, umbrella groups fighting each other, both of whom were fighting the government. Parallel to that, Al-Qaeda's efforts to extend itself out of the Middle East and into Africa also were occurring, which brought international attention on the Republic of Mali in an extreme way for the Malians. Pressure was such that in order to really figure out which conflict, which tensions to resolve first, the international community was really pressuring the Malians to deal with its internal disorder, with its internal chaos. So the Malian parties, the conflicting parties, did come together. They did negotiate a peace agreement, but they did it with tremendous reluctance. Yes, they wanted peace. No, they were not sure that any of the factions were going to do what they had promised to do. So they themselves wrote into their agreement, this time, we want something to be able to keep everybody honest and to say, if you're not meeting the agreement, who is it? What is the obstacle? Who is the obstacle? Why is the obstacle? And what's going to be the solution? Now, in Africa, we look at it as accountability in the United States as something that comes automatic with almost everything they were supposed to do. There's got to be an ombudsman, there's accountability, there's transparency. In Africa, the subtext when you talk to people involved in foreign affairs is always, well, in Africa, you got to take your time. Well, there's so much corruption. Well, there's no transparency. This is an unprecedented African-initiated move to say, no, we are going to demand accountability. So I really think that there's not enough appreciation of what that means. It's the first time on the continent in an agreement that it is part of the text and that it was organic to the text. All right, then the question becomes, well, who's going to be this independent observer? Again, in an unprecedented fashion, the Malians, the only thing that the three rebel entities could agree on was who they wanted to be the independent observer. And the Malians themselves selected, we want the Carter Center, which again, is something that's why I call it a jewel here. Mali's a Francophone country, for those of you that don't realize that. They selected a non-African, non-Francophone, American-based, though international, NGO because the Carter Center had the kind of credibility that they could all rely on. Carter Center, through its health programs, has been in Mali for over 2 decades. Every single ethnic group, every single region of the country knew people from the Carter Center. They knew the Carter Center people had either lived among them, had worked with them, and had worked with the government in order to make the condition of life there better. So they felt like the Carter Center could bring its resources and its integrity and credibility to bear and be an unbiased witness, which is what we're doing. We're bearing witness to what's happening with the Accord. So I just want to let you all have that sink in, because for me it's extremely important, and I think it's part of the reason why our work is valued so much in Mali. All right, so what's the work? What does the independent observer do? Obviously, a peace accord has commitments and conditions that every side is supposed to meet. Our mandate as independent observer is to identify the obstacles and to publish them, to make those obstacles known to everybody, and where we can, to recommend solutions, how to overcome those things. That means we travel. You already heard we have a team. It's actually it's 6 concrete people, but we rely on the whole Carter Center when we need to. So we're bringing all the resources of the Carter Center to bear. But anyway, we have 4 staff who live in Bamako, and I go there almost every single month, and I travel around the country, particularly in the initially war-torn areas, but also to central Mali. We're also supposed to cover southern Mali, because the peace treaty's for the whole country. Everybody's got to realize, well, we went to war, what's come out of it? What are the benefits what are the dividends from the peace that we're supposed to get? In the agreement, the government said, okay, we recognize that you haven't been getting services. There have been no schools in the north since 2011. Imagine if you had a 10-year-old at home who hadn't been at school since 2011, if you hadn't been at school for 2011. And there are over 500 schools like that throughout the region. Electricity, no electricity service, no health services. You can't register a birth certificate up north. What we call basic government services needed to be extended into the north. Not that they had been disrupted, it's that they weren't there. But also, the rebels needed, when you end a conflict, and if it's a bellicose conflict like that, the rebels are supposed to disarm. They're supposed to demobilize, disarm, and figure out how to integrate back into society. Did they really want to become members of the National Army? If so, they need to show up and go through the training and be deployed. If they don't want to go back into a military service, what do they want to do? How are we going to use these able-bodied, experienced men and some women in the future society that you're going to build? There were steps that each side was to take in order to make this kind of thing happen. And our job is to not only talk to the decision makers around the table where they're supposed to be planning this out, but to talk to communities to see if they can feel it. As we go around the country, we meet with women's groups, we meet with young people, we meet with the various political leaders and religious and traditional leaders in the country to ask them how they feel the accord is being implemented, whether or not they see the conditions of their life changing. And we also meet with those representatives of the former rebels, the representatives of the current government as well, to find out what creates the obstacles for them. Why can't they move further? The peace treaty in Mali was signed in 2015. The actual independent observers work did not begin until 2018. We started in 2018. I guess there was negotiations for it in 2017, but we didn't start our work until January of 2018. So we're finishing 2 years of observation. We have published 5 reports. I brought an example. I think I left it on the table. We publish a report about every 4 months, and we make that report in French and in English, available online, available in a hard copy, and we distribute it around the country. What we are doing through this effort is really creating a bridge between civil society, those people who were affected by the war, who say leaders, whether they're from the rebel movements or from the government, who are supposed to be implementing this for them, but who are really not communicating enough about what's going on. We become their source of information, and we also become their channel of commentary back to what is called the follow-up committee, composed of leadership from the formal rota groups, leadership from the government, and supported by the neighboring countries from the region, as well as the larger international community, the Perm 5 from the UN Security Council, the European Union, the African Union, the ECOWAS states. So what this experience, as we're coming on the end of our second year, what we've learned through this experience really is that this, as an NGO, the Carter Center has created a model that is really well worth replicating in other kinds of, in like situations. Part of it has to do with the Carter Center's own credibility, as I mentioned before, but it also has to do with the fact that we are able to build this bridge and shine the light in a very unbiased way. There was talk at our table, relevant and apt, for using Africans to solve African problems. And yes, absolutely. But there's also room that you can't just ice out an international community that has an interest in having this work. Not only does the region of West Africa have an interest in Mali preserving its peace, building its peace and then preserving it, but Europe has an interest in that. The United States has an interest in that. Were terrorist groups to have succeeded in getting their camps lodged in Mali, that would cause a problem not just for the Malians, but everybody around. So there is a role for international stakeholders, but there's a role that has to be bolstered, justified through the proof that you can do this in an unbiased way. And I must say, so far, to our credit, we have been acknowledged as being the most reliable account of what's working and what's not working in the implementation of the peace accord, and certainly the most visible actor that is trying to, in a way, give voice to civil society about how the delay in implementation in Mali, in this instance, about the effects that that's having on their lives. So I wanted to give that as a big umbrella. I have no idea how much more time on this part I have left, but I would actually like for that to encompass what you all think of for this part of my presentation, because I think the rest of my presentation is going to be about what it was like as a government person. And I have had a tremendously rich and varied experience as a government official. But putting the shoe in the individual's hand, in the individual NGOs, in the non-state actors' hands, and seeing the kind of reach and flexibility that you have in that context, I think is important for you to think about here. So forgive me if that's not 20 minutes, but I'd welcome any of your questions, and I thank you for your attention. All right? And I think I'll join this conversation. Take a mic. Okay. Okay.
I guess I can start. Yeah, this is on. Oh, is that one on? Or? Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Ambassador Williams. And it is such a pleasure to have you here. I speak for everybody that is here. I mean, what an honor. And thank you to the Carter Center for really supporting us and forming part of this event. As you mentioned, we do want to hear a little bit more about your experience in government. And to me, one of the very, very interesting is the beginning of the career is always very, very important, especially we have so many faces here of individuals who are eager to get out of school and then go out into the real world and realize what is the reality of working in government and working on peace processes. And then how does that lead to an appointment as an ambassador, and then the challenges that you faced as an ambassador walking into that conflict down there?
That's a lot of questions at once. All right, great, but I'm delighted to try to answer all of them. Thank you very much, Pedro. All right, I made my pitch. NGOs are important, individual work, civil society is important. Now I'll make my pitch for the government. Now more than ever, the United States of America needs good diplomats. There is a role for you in the US Foreign Service. It's not easy. I certainly worked my way up from the very bottom. I started out as a general services officer, which meant that I was in charge of the contracts and of the security force for our embassy, and just making the embassy run like an American business or entity ought to run. But my first post was not Paris or London, where, of course, you just get an office building and you run it. My first post was Conakry, Guinea in 1984, the month after the death of Sékou Touré. And during a time period, the very next year, there was a coup d'etat. And there was no electricity anywhere. There was no food anywhere. We had to drive. I had to personally drive to Sierra Leone to buy light bulbs for the embassy. So as far as understanding, and not to mention I had 150 security people on our residences, not because we were a big embassy, but because it took that many people and shifts of people in a place where there's no employment and you're one of the few employers, just to make things as close to what an American official would want them to be. So I worked my way up. I can tell you what that's like. But from being GSO, from Guinea, I went to Panama, where, again, I'm working my way up the junior ranks, junior officers in the political cone. I came in the service as a political analyst. And that meant that once I filled out the regular requirements of being a foreign service officer, you know your language, you serve out of cone, you serve in cone. That meant for the rest of my career, I was going to be doing political reports everywhere I went. Well, you send the junior political officer to cover the opposition because of all the big wigs, they're covering the government. They're going to the cocktails, they're going to the presidency, they're meeting with the governors. So the younger or the newer political officer works with opposition because it is always US policy to listen to all sides of the thing. Well, this again is the 80s. What happened in Panama in 1986 and 1987, the Cruzada Civilista. So you had in Panama what they called the fax rebellion, or the revolution of the business class, or the fax machines, which was really civil society, the business group of society leading a pro-democracy rebellion in Panama. Nonviolent, but critical. We'll fast forward as I go to the United Nations, where there I had my multilateral diplomacy experience, where you're negotiating with some of the very best diplomats in the world. Most people who you see in foreign governments, either as presidents or foreign ministers or other kinds of ministers, served their governments at the UN. It's not the case in the United States, but it is in most other places. And you are negotiating on everything. So the Beijing conference that everyone refers to about women's rights, the sustainable development issues, all those things. So I have my multilateral experience. Then more political, bilateral things, and let's jump up to Niger. When I became ambassador to Niger, it was right after the military had thwarted the efforts of a democratically elected president to extend his term beyond his mandate. The military came in, I think it was February of 2010, and pushed out the president. They did not kill him. He stayed in the country. They pushed out that government, and they said they were going to take over for 1 year. Well, there were tremors in Africa because very rarely when militaries take over governments do they stay for 1 year, even though they say that. But Sali Jubu promised that's all he wanted, but he insisted that meant that the political parties, even the one from the former president and the opposition, needed to get their acts together so that they could have elections and get back to their democracy, which in fact is what they did. So the military government stayed in for 13 months. The extra month was at the political people's request because they weren't quite ready for the elections. And then there was an election, and we had President Issoufou Mahamadou come in. So most of my time in Niger was really with the democratically elected president, and it was a time for the United States to really try to help consolidate that democracy because the country was traumatized. They had had several military coups in its history, and they were not clear where things stood. And we became quite good partners. The United States and Niger now partner almost in every single domain. Yes, we have a very strong military training relationship. We made sure that I made sure while I was there that the foundation of that relationship was going to be according to the Nigerian criteria, that it was at their invitation, that we weren't setting up bases. If we were going to have our people there, it was going to be on their basis. If we were going to be learning things, their military people were going to be learning what we were learning. And it became one of the important models, one of the reasons that the CIA decided to give me an award. I know you sort of choke at that. I was actually surprised too, but honored, because it really did set up a model that then they were a template that they could use for countering terrorism in the region, but also for making synergies between the various agencies. Counterterrorism is no longer just a spy kind of combat kind of thing. It's agency, it's Department of Justice, it's Department of State, it's even USAID, because you have to bring in development, you have to bring in incentives, you have to bring in alternatives for people who feel like they don't have any alternatives. And trying to make that work in a way that meets the culture, criteria, and imperatives of the host country was my mission. Does that go part of the way in answering your question?
That's great, yeah, thank you.
You don't have to applaud every question, thank you.
Ambassador, earlier you briefly touched upon how the public sector and the private sector have different roles in peace-building initiatives and interventions. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more upon how those two roles intertwine and kind of support each other and are kind of interdependent in terms of peace-building initiatives.
Thank you. I can use maybe two examples, both of which are relevant, as you think of it, to Atlanta. I was Deputy Assistant Secretary for African Affairs from 2013 to 2015. And I guess it was in 2014-ish, or the beginning of 2015, we had the outbreak of the Ebola virus in West Africa. Sierra Leone got hit, Liberia got hit, Guinea got hit. And the spread was, and one small part of Nigeria, was it Senegal? Was it? They had built-in systems, which we'll get to. But at any rate, when that virus when that pandemic was really gaining its strength, the State Department was alerted, but we realized we were going to have to go be outside of just state and outside of CDC to really figure out how to stop the pandemic and how to get the international community engaged in this. So we had to pull together not only our government agencies, as I said, CDC was pivotal, and later on started chairing. First interagency meetings were chaired by state, but we quickly transitioned for CDC to do that. But the private sector played a critical role in helping us to pre-position, to jumpstart our responses. Because private sector was able to within the health sector, we started a communication between the interagency of government and a consortium of businesses. It started out in Guinea, where private businesses had their mining camps and their mining resources. They already had health units, and they had trucks, or they might have had IVs and things that they used for their workers. They already knew the transportation routes. We're talking about remote areas in parts of West Africa where road travel is not automatic. Maybe sometimes you have to take a cropper plane or something, or you have to use you have to know the area in order to know where the communities are. The businesses that were there linked up with the government officials to say, we can help project your reach if we can somehow start communicating with you and working together with you. So that was really essential in helping to stem the flow of that pandemic. But it also, the other thing I want to say about that, because in Sierra Leone, that virus wiped out about 25% of the professionals in the health sector. And when you have, in a matter of a couple of weeks, a quarter of your health professionals dead, you can see how the fabric of your society is rent. It's torn. And that can lead to the spread of other kinds of disease, the spread of other kinds of insecurity, psychological insecurity, physical insecurity, and a withdrawal of communities, a withdrawal of trust and confidence in government, which then leads to fragmentation, can lead to conflict, certainly leads to what we would call an opposite of peace. So we needed to bring in not only all the resources of government and our military, which helped also transport things on their cargo planes, but we needed private sector to give us that advance, to give us the initial lifeline of materials. So that's one way. The other, shorter way, is again with the independent observer. As I said, one of the reasons the Carter Center was so relied upon was because the Carter Center has a health program in Mali. And for years it has almost eradicated guinea worm in Mali. And it has been working on trachoma, which is a kind of blindness, in Mali for years. And therefore could be relied upon to be a partner. So, you're welcome.
Dear Ambassador, if you see in most conflict area, the most affected are women. You see that, most of them really grieving for their own families. The other one, like having the burden of taking care of the children. I wonder if you could shed light on how power hierarchy hinder women participation. And if also, you can advise us, on better ways of making sure that, women participate in peace-building initiatives.
You're right. I think it's going to take a generation. A power hierarchy is just that. It is a hierarchy. It's a hierarchy. And so you've got to see it, and you've got to start from the very beginning in addressing it. The situation in Mali is a case in point. There were lots of women in the rebellion that happened among those that, particularly among the rebels who wanted to secede or were looking for autonomy, there were a lot of active women who were quite vocal in their movement. Articulate, adamant, they're warriors just like the men. After the peace treaty, and they were at the negotiations. After the peace treaty is signed, after the peace accord is signed, and everybody moves to Bamako, where the representatives of the movements get a little stipend to come to the meetings every month where they get to sit down with the people from the capital, all the women are gone. Not a soul in the room is female. On the Malian government side, there are a couple of women ministers that you see whenever you get the family photo of the government, but you don't see any women, not even from the women's ministry, at the table discussing how are we going to really implement, how are we going to do the things we promised. We said we're going to deliver social services, we said we're going to get health services in schools, we're going to get our teachers back to that region. No women. So, in our very first independent observer report, we talked about the lack of inclusion of women in these discussions of how to go about doing this. In the communities that you were fighting to protect, women can tell you what they need. When we went to talk to them, they said, okay, fine. The government's not fighting the rebels anymore. The two rebel factions aren't fighting each other anymore. But guess what? The kids are running around the streets with guns. They're raping our children. They're robbing our cars. They're breaking into our homes. They're just wandering around wantonly. And it is making us even more afraid. That was the public's complaint. And that was not just the public's complaint against the government. It was the government's complaint against their own movement leaders. Where are you now that our conditions haven't changed, yet somehow yours have? So, faced with that, among other recommendations, the coordinating committee, the actual follow-up committee, had to discuss this. And a very interesting thing happened. No, women were not yet included. But the interesting thing that happened, they said, well, yes, maybe we should figure out a way to talk to women. But I don't want any of these women from the capital. We should only talk to the women from that region. And I would like all the women to think about that notion. Because we have a tendency to automatically see, just like we said, Africans have to solve African problems. Women have to serve women's problems. Only rural women can deal with rural women's problems. I think there's a fallacy in that. Because those other women from the capital, some of them are actually educated in different ways of doing things, it's true. They've been abroad, they can articulate better, and they're not as tied to traditional forms of dealing with male hierarchy. So I thought it was very interesting that the president of the follow-up committee said, we're only going to deal with a subset. We want the country women. We don't want any of these other people. Women have to, in this instance, have to be able to seize their own agency and let them determine whom they want at the table. Maybe they want that other person to speak for them, who will be able to go one-on-one and to be able to look at the fine print of whatever is decided. So that's an anecdote to show you how women can be blocked. Your question is, well, what do you do to unblock it? The first thing is always transparency. Shine sunlight on it. Expose the issue. But the second thing is, you do have to sit down and you have to talk to people. As I said, when we went to talk to women's groups, they didn't want to talk about the fine, Article 27.A of the peace accord. They wanted to say, I want the schools open again. I want to know when we're going to have a mixed police force. I don't want just the government's police, and I don't want just that movement's police. I want it to be what you promised. Right now, we're supposed to have representatives of all three groups. When is that going to happen? So that I feel that I can walk down the street after sundown. You have to be able to listen, to record, and I think the next thing is you have to be able to help find ways to answer those legitimate grievances. It was not, our first report was in May of 2018. Our first report. On September 17th, just a couple of days ago, we were supposed to have had the first official meeting between the follow-up committee and some of civil society from northern Mali. The meeting got postponed for reasons not related to that, but that's just to show you, it took almost a year and a half for the hierarchy to respond and make it a point to have civil society and women's groups at one of its meetings. But it will only happen through constant urging, through constant showing of sunlight, and through presence, through being there. There's no magic to it. A hierarchy is a structure of power, and you got to be able to face it and constantly confront it.
Now, Ambassador Williams, that's very well said. With regards to peace, and we were having a great discussion at our table, and Mariah brought up, or one of individuals on, Mariah, raise your hand. She brought up that peace starts at home. And it is not something that is just the leaders of the country off to in a negotiation table, taking care of it and getting it done. It requires for a country to get behind whatever they believe. And my own personal story coming from Colombia, Colombia in 2017 had a peace accord, which was broken about a month ago. And it's because not everybody got behind it. And not all of the leaders were held accountable for keeping that and bringing the country into that peace process and executing all of the different requirements of the peace process for both parties. How can we make sure that our leaders are held accountable and get them to lead with peace in mind and retain peace? And I'm sure you're having issues with that in Mali, or challenges in Mali that you're working through. And I mean, what is the strategy for something like that?
You have to really think out of the box. Thank you for that question, and thank you for stimulating it, Mariah. But it is a big challenge. Accountability is not just publishing the truth, let's say. Yes, the sunlight's important, but you're right. The accountability is, well, what happens? What happens when you say, the rebels haven't given up their arms? I thought this was supposed to be the end of the rebellion. So where's the disarmament part of DDR? Or the government hasn't reopened the schools, or they're still here. So then what? Once you've stated what's wrong, how do you get them to move? I think that's where this notion of incentives is supposed to play. The international community thought, and sometimes it's correct in that sanctions, if we threaten them with sanctions, that'll make them move, because nobody wants their American bank account frozen. I got news for you. Most of the nomads don't have American bank accounts. Well, then they won't be able to travel to the United States, or they won't be able to travel to Europe. That's a little bit more important. But so anyway, you have to find incentives or negative reinforcement, whatever you want to call it. And then when that doesn't work, the other part of accountability really has to be with making sure that the public, that civil society, is as informed as possible about what's not working, so that they feel that it's interesting. The more someone hears the truth that they can verify, the more rooted and solid and secure they feel about pronouncing that truth and advancing that truth. So the more civil society is exposed, I believe, I feel like they are more empowered to go and challenge leadership. That's what's happening in Mali now. I think that's why we were getting ready to have a meeting with civil society and the people who are around the table planning how to meet out how to execute the agreement. The other thing, though, there is a role for NGOs as well as state actors to play in helping civil society keep governments accountable. So and that's through alternative ways of reaching something. One of the things that we did in Niger, for example, was to identify people who wanted to do something with their lives after they had come out of Libya. They had either been in Gaddafi's army, although they were Nigerian, or they had somehow been conscripted to work there, and they came back. They were able-bodied, they were young, and they were back in a country that they didn't know so well. So they could either be tempted to do things that were against society, or they could be retrained in something. So the United States set up a program to try to retrain some of these able-bodied people who want to feel like they're making a contribution for their own families, and so that they have a role in their own world. You have to provide great avenues for that. That's where the international community and sometimes NGOs and obviously private sector can really be useful and can help somebody feel like their value is respected and that their capacity to change their own community is real.
Thank you for that, Ambassador. I think Pedro said it really well when he said that peace starts at home. And I think I speak for a lot of the student and student leaders in the room when I say that, we all, once we graduate, once we leave Emory, want to contribute to peace building efforts on matters about which we are passionate. And my next question for you is, how do we begin to shape the next generation of peace builders and global leaders? What is the advice that you could give to students, college, high school age, that are really working towards a career of peace building?
That's a huge question, and I thank you. As I said, now more than ever, we do really need diplomats of all kinds. One of the things, it may sound facile, but it's true, expose yourselves to as wide, as broad a variety of people as possible. It's not just about, I mean, Americans like to travel anyway, but it's really about understanding. At our table, we were talking about conflict and realizing that the United States has been spared in many ways, certainly your generation, of seeing and living in a situation of warfare. But if you step over the ocean into almost any region of the world, over the Pacific or the Atlantic, you'll come in contact with people whose entire villages have been destroyed, whose lifestyles have been taken away, whose representative people, because of their ethnicity or their religion, have been driven out from someplace. We've been spared that. But it's very important to understand that other people haven't. And what does it feel like when you're running across the street to go get bread for the family? Or what does it feel like when you don't know if somebody's going to stop you and ask what your religion is, and what the right answer might be, is supposed to be, in order for you to keep going where you're going. So part of it is exposure, reading. I didn't start out, I didn't do political science in school. I was a comparative literature person. But I think that carried me a very long way. Not only did it give me my language foundations, but through literature, you learn a lot about cultures. You learn a lot about superstitions, traditions, values, family. You learn a lot about how people want to think about themselves and the way they see other people. So you don't have to be an economist or a poli-sci nerd in order to make a contribution. I don't have anything against those, but I'm just saying, to the way we can help people live together with each other. So I would say that. I would say that your generation and the ones to follow also have another huge asset and advantage and challenge in what is our present day technology and our rapidly changing technology. You have reach within a literal blink of an eye, of millions of people just through social media. And we've already seen the examples where that can be positive and can be negative. You can do flash mobs for fashion shows, and you can do flash mobs to attack something. You can spread disinformation, etc. But you all have to harness that tool, and you have a tremendous opportunity to build virtual communities of hope, virtual communities of dignity, virtual communities of values, all the good stuff. And now I want to, now the storm cloud. Peace building is essential. It's important, but we have to also understand, as you get to know other people, the wall that you may hit, that is, I don't know if it's impossible to break down, but it is extremely thick, and it's very hard, and it will bring you a crush of reality, is that you might really encounter another human being, another group of human beings who absolutely do not share your values. And I think in certain areas of our world, that's what the current challenge is, as much as we don't like to think of it that way. That's what the challenge is as I'm thinking of it. A little example of this is the book, I don't know if many of you have read it, called The Shadow Wars. Jim Sciutto writes about a period of time in American diplomacy, during which I was a diplomat, where we seem to, he uses another expression, but I think the War College expression is we drank our own Kool-Aid, or we ended up mirroring each other. And what he means by that is, we believe in democracy. I earnestly, completely believe in democracy. I believe in human rights. And I believe in free trade. But there might be some people who actually, they don't care about human rights. They don't believe in the notion of individual freedoms. And they could care less about free trade or democracy. So you really might run into someone or a group of people whose objective is to make sure that what you believe in is demolished. So I don't want you to think that the world is such that all we've got to do is figure out what the song is, and then we'll all sing it together, and it's all done. Because that's not really how nowadays this world is shaped. Maybe you can find that page, but you need to be prepared. You need to be prepared to make your case and understand why you're fighting for your case. Because there are some entities out there who really do not want to see this grand experiment succeed. And I will say that it is a grand experiment. A small example, tiny example, which I think actually we do share the same music book, and we're just not on the right page yet. If you talk to some South Africans, your generation, like let's say millennials of South Africa, they'll give you the argument, the Vienna Convention on Human Rights, that was concocted by the world powers, Eleanor Roosevelt, for God's sakes. None of the colonies of the day had any say in that document. So very good for you, conquerors of the world, Northerners, for what you came up with. But frankly, that doesn't work for us anymore. We don't necessarily believe in all these kinds of things. We don't think, matter of fact, we're not even so sure that governments, the way you have helped to create them, work that much for us. We believe much more in people power. We believe much more in let's say, private enterprise. But we also don't think that individual rights, the way you've stated them here, are part of our DNA. That's a discussion we can have. And I think through example and exercise, I believe you can find the right page in the book. It's a big book, but I know that we've got a common song in there somewhere. There are bigger challenges, though. I think that we have yet to figure out how to confront. And in many ways, we'll be looking to people like you to help us do that.
Thank you, Ambassador. You have mentioned earlier that the health situation or the health system, especially in a conflict area, really get deteriorating. I wonder if you help, shed light on how, what is the intersection between the health and the conflict, and also can health system, integrate peace building in their projects or activities?
Yes, to the latter question. And on the first one, I want to go back to the Ebola example. Ebola is spread, from what we understand, by, first of all, catching the virus from people maybe that might eat bushmeat or are exposed to the virus, and then it's easily transmitted when we have contact with somebody where the virus rages. Well, in Guinea and in Sierra Leone, where eating animals from the bush was common for certain regions, remote regions, and then burying your dead after a certain kind of ritual, a traditional ritual that they'd done for millennia, was the common practice. The notion of coming into that community and stopping that burial practice was anathema. It was really taboo, and it was enraging to village elders and things like that. So that was enough. It was enough to start a little fight over. Villages didn't want to accept help from the Red Cross, from the U.S., from anybody, from their own doctors, when we said, stop burying your dead this way, let us burn them, you must, go under certain kinds of cleansing procedures and all that. A challenge to tradition without the right kind of preparation. In this case, it was a traditional health practice of cleanliness and respect for the past. That can lead to big conflict. I mean, we were talking about aid workers, nurses, and doctors were killed because they were coming in to help the village, and the village refused it. So there is a nexus between health and health education and conflict. Health programs, the Carter Center is actually using, again, I cite the Independent Observer. That's an example where, because of the health program, the Carter Center was able to step in and become the Independent Observer. Also through that program, and in others like it, I think, where you have a community that feels it's being taken care of because it's healthy, because you're showing either models of sanitation or models of vaccination or whatever, you have a confidence base. And from that confidence base, then you can build, you can add on to that. I think that in Mali, there is another conflict that is happening, and it's in central Mali. And that's an intercommunal ethnic between pastoralists and nomadic groups, but it is being aided by jihadi groups who say, who are taking advantage of an absent government and of the basic chaos that's in that part of the country. But the Carter Center has still been able to deliver some of its services to that region, despite the fact that government people can't go in there. And part of that reason is because at the fundamental level on the ground, people in the community they'll tell the jihadis, they'll tell the government, they'll tell whoever's listening, we need this group. That provides a tremendous opportunity for the Carter Center. They can't abuse that opportunity, but I mean, the notion that they could go where almost no one else can in order to render a service that everybody acknowledges is essential and that is helping to stabilize that village is extremely powerful and offers a sample, a model of how that nexus between peace building and non-traditionally conceived of measures can work.
Thank you.
Thank you. I know that we have run out of time, but if you would be willing, we could take one question from the audience and one question from our viewers online. Okay, so we can open it up. We can take one question from the audience. Yes.
Both those things. But I'll be quicker. I think I wasn't talking too long in my answer, so I apologize. But China actually took a page from the Western world's book on doing development all of a sudden. It realized that there was a growing antagonism in Africa to China. And now, if you notice now, they've started to do a lot more, they're building hospitals. They used to build soccer fields all over the place. Every once in a while, they'd build a parliamentary building or a telecommunications building. Now they are trying to do something more in the traditional services, health services mostly. And they are also exporting their language. They're having language schools. I have no problem with that. Africa needs health services. The more languages a person speaks, the better, I think. But it is true that it is, I can't say that it's robbing the continent of its natural resources, but it's certainly not paying market value for them. The Africans aren't fooled by that. The problem is that the Western world is not offering a Marshall Plan for Africa. We did for Europe, after we went to war in Europe. We did similar in Japan. And the Africans are taking advantage of the odd loans and the extension that China's giving. But they're not fooled by they're not looking at necessarily the political model in China as one that they can emulate. So I think that the lesson that the United States needs to take from what China's doing is that we missed a great opportunity by doing, in many ways, piecemeal development projects that didn't have broader reach, and that also we missed the opportunity just to invest and build. We had to help build things in Africa: roads, communication, schools. Invest in human capacity. There was a brief period of time where we actually trained teachers and for university and technical trades. But we stopped doing that, and we stopped giving scholarships. We really need, I think, to relearn that lesson that you have to invest in people, and you have to. Africa's huge, and the structural problems, just the lack of electricity, the absence of modern technology in agriculture, the food insecurity, and the things that can bring it towards food security. Those problems are so big. We have solutions for that we were actually too stingy or we didn't prioritize to participate with the Africans on. So I think we are now watching as China is leapfrogging and addressing some of those issues. Yes, with bad terms, but at least it's getting done. So I think that's where the balance is.
Jason, is there one question we can take?
I do have one question.
Okay.
How do we reform the current human rights structure to include populations that were historically excluded from its creation? This was in relation to, we're talking about the South African millennials and the UDHR.
I don't want to say that all South Africans are against human rights. I certainly didn't mean to suggest that, so please, I hope that didn't come from them. But when you talk about groups that were traditionally excluded, talk about women are a group. I do think that I'm a little conflicted because I still have, I had 31 years of a U.S. government hat, and I am very attached to what I know as human rights. And I think we have to be careful that as we have our discussion about human rights, we don't say, well, let's just have a democratic vote about it. Let's just see what the majority says. I don't want the discussion to go in that way. But I do think that the discussion of human rights has been broadened to look at LGBT issues, for one. A huge, huge controversial issue in parts of Africa. Now, some people will say, as a matter of fact, my former boss, who was the Assistant Secretary for African Affairs, said she had a discussion with the President of Kenya about LGBT rights in Kenya. And he said, look, that's not going to happen tomorrow, but it's going to happen in Kenya. We will be ready, and it won't be too long. So I think part of the discussion of inclusion of groups who were traditionally excluded is to give voice to those groups, because this generation now if the United States is any example, this generation is ready to listen and ready to look at people who might be different from them. So I don't think that the issue is, can we make sure that human rights apply to other groups? I think that the tension is more about how much validity we give to the right of the individual versus how much weight versus the weight we give to the right of the state. And do those two have to be in conflict? That's what I'd say to that.
Okay, thank you. Wonderful.
Thank you.
I was going to ask for applause, so that was wonderful, well timed. So it takes a village to raise a child in Africa, African proverb. And it takes a village to raise our child, which was Emory 21 Days of Peace. This could not have been possible without all of you, without everybody's support. So I want to thank everybody.
Thank you.
I'm not going to name names because that's going to take forever. But you know who you are, and thank you.
Thank you too, Obse. This was wonderful. I want to thank all of you for being so patient. I'm sorry if I was a little windy, but congratulations for doing this. And I hope that all of you find your career path and follow it and find that it is rewarding, not only to you, but for those whom you hope to serve. Thank you.